where we want to start it is, I think, the biggest high fantasy franchise ever.
Most influential.
Built
the foundation
for modern fantasy, and that is Lord of the Rings. So let's go all the way back to, let's go pre-movies, right? Because I think that's where we got to start, is the books.
Absolutely, that's where it did start.
So let's talk about that. Pre-Peter Jackson trilogy.
Even before the movies, especially before the movies, it still set the tone for modern fantasy. Kind of a niche IP, if you will, like mainly nerds reading it, people who were into elves and dwarves and magic and wizards before it was cool.
Right.
But it had a pretty substantial following. There's quite a few people out there who were super pumped for the movies because they loved the books growing up. It came out in the 70s, so a solid 30 years of circulation before it came out. It was popular enough for his son to release the Silmarillion. It was popular enough for his son to release subsequent novels based off of his father's notes. So there was a following there.
Yeah.
It just wasn't mainstream. Right.
When did The Hobbit come out, though?
Oh, that came out in like the 30s. If you'd have said the word Hobbit in 1964, nobody would have known what you were talking about.
Yeah, they're like, what? We're trying to fight the Viet Cong. What?
Yeah. But
what are you talking about?
After The Lord of the Rings came out, I still don't think most people knew, but there's a bigger following. Enough of a following for things like, in the 80s, Dungeons and Dragons to start happening.
Yeah.
Because without Tolkien, there was no Dungeons and Dragons.
Right.
So enough people knew about it, were enough fans to build kind of, their own game based off of the ideas that Tolkien put out.
Dude, that's crazy, actually. And there were animated movies, though, right?
Those came out in the late 70s, I believe, but again, I think they were pretty niche.
I think it's fair to also point out the influence of C.S. Lewis, The Chronicles of Narnia. Didn't Tolkien and Lewis have direct impacts on each other's stories, right?
I'm not as familiar with their relationship. I knew they were friends. I knew they kind of bounced each other's ideas or across each other, but I really think their approach to literature was a little too different for them to really have a massive impact on one another. No disrespect to Lewis, but given the ham-fisted allegory of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right, of all of the Christian themes that are present in the first 2, maybe 3 books of that series, the Chronicles of Narnia series, and then on into the last one especially, I don't think Tolkien disliked Lewis's work. I just don't think he had a whole lot of interest in it either.
Well, he thought it was kind of childish, didn't he? Kind of like...
Yes, and I mean, to be fair, Lewis was writing those stories for children.
Yeah.
As far as I'm aware. You can't create a compelling narrative if you don't have an experience with that thing. And so the work shine through. People find allegories to Tolkien's life all the time in his writings. The way he describes Mordor reflects very closely to descriptions of World War I battlefields.
Yeah.
Right? Because you write based off of what you know. When you're picturing the most miserable place on Earth, you're going to think back to the most miserable place you've ever been. Or that you've ever read about.
That's a good point.
You can't describe things that you've never experienced.
Yeah.
And so the allegory present might not have been intentional, but it's still there.
Right.
Whereas C.S. Lewis took a very clear-cut story that is written in the Bible and has been written about an innumerable amount of times since those stories were first recorded, and framed it in a new way. Here's Lion Jesus, and if you don't understand that, then you might want to get your reading levels checked.
If you're into that, we're not knocking you, but...
Those stories are great. They're very compelling, and it is a wonderful introduction to the world of magic and magical storytelling to young readers. I would absolutely not expect anyone younger than 14 to be able to pick up The Lord of the Rings and interpret all the nuances present in there. I don't expect most adults to be able to do that, to be honest.
I was about to say, yeah.
But anybody can pick up the Chronicles of Narnia and have them read to them or read them themselves and draw some kind of meaning out of it.
Mm.
Whether or not you subscribe to the same, religious background as Lewis or the intentional religious message in there, you can still draw meaning out of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that up through the 20th century, Dungeons and Dragons, you said came out in the 80s, right?
Somewhere around there. It became popular in the 80s.
Then you had Lion and the Witch and the Wardrobe, which came out obviously way earlier.
Between 50 and 56.
So as we look at the history of modern fantasy, and when I say modern fantasy, I mean post-World War II fantasy. Then you get to the 90s, and then comes probably the biggest revolution of fantasy before the trilogy, which is Harry Potter. Is it fair to say that revolutionized, well, what are we going to call it?
I would
Young
argue
adult?
it's probably the most successful fantasy. It's probably the word to describe it. It's the most successful fantasy series of all time.
Yeah. I mean, that...
In terms of
Yeah.
pop culture, in terms of book sales, number of people who have read it and are familiar with it, I'd say it's probably, you got the setup there, it's probably the most successful.
I mean, she monopolized the 90s when it came to fantasy.
You can't write a fantasy novel in today's world without drawing on the stage that Tolkien set.
It's impossible because it's so it's impossible not to.
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to tell me as a writer or any other creator that you're going to make a fantasy TV show or movie and it's somehow not going to be?
It can't be done and call it fantasy because in today's media culture, fantasy is rooted in Tolkien.
Isn't that crazy, man? I'm trying to think of if any one person has such a influence on any other industry. I'm thinking music, sports. I can't think of anyone who has who defined that industry, literally.
We could probably make an argument about Michael Jordan changing the style of basketball. Because everybody after Jordan wanted to be like Jordan, so everybody started playing like him. You might be able to make an argument about Elvis setting the stage for modern rock.
Beatles?
Perhaps the Beatles as well. I'm going to be honest, I don't know enough about like music and music development, progression.
That's what I'm saying, like the one-to-one correlation of a 2023 aspiring writer in fantasy to Tolkien. It's still his shadow is so long, man.
His shadow is so long, and there will never be another like it because of the pressure to produce content in today's world.
Explain that.
Well, the problem is, in today's content-driven world, everyone wants to get their stuff out early and get it popular quick. Tolkien spent, I don't know how long, 50 years piecing together this world for his own gratification. Before he ever, writing these little stories that were never supposed to see the light of day until he produced The Lord of the Rings. And if you go read The Lord of the Rings, actually read the books and look at what's being said, much of the stuff that you can find in the Silmarillion is referenced at some point or another in passing in The Lord of the Rings.
Wow.
Bilbo has the nerve to compose a song about Elrond's father in Elrond's house.
What?
And, you don't know who Arendelle is. If you've just read The Lord of the Rings.
Arendelle.
You have no idea who this guy is. You hear Aragorn singing a song, reciting a poem or something at one point before they even get to Rivendell about the lay of Beren and Luthien. You don't know who they are.
Yeah. Dude, he's a beast.
So, there's just these little toe dips into the greater lore of The Lord of the Rings just sprinkled throughout the series. So you know there's more to it. It's so fleshed out. In today's writings, most people don't take the time 50 years in Tolkien's case.
50.
They don't take the
50
time to like really flesh out the world. So if your stuff becomes obscenely popular, case in point, Harry Potter, people want they're itching for a deeper lore, and if you don't have that all mapped out before you start writing, then you end up with contradictory statements when you try to answer people's questions in the future. You don't think everything through. And to be honest, that's okay. Like, you don't have to have everything mapped out, but the problem is everyone wants to be Tolkien and have an answer for most everything, and so they start trying to come up with answers, and then you forget all the answers that you piece together because you don't have a coherent view for every single aspect of the world.
And you don't have to, because you're not fucking Tolkien.
Yeah. You don't have to have an answer to everything. Like, because that's the way it is should be good enough. Problem is, modern consumers want everyone to have a fleshed out lore, like Tolkien, like The Witcher, like Fallout.
Oh yeah.
Where there's just
Bioshock. Yeah.
they thought, like, you go play Fallout, you'll find throughout the games all little bits of information that you can read to learn more about the world. That has nothing to do with the game that you're playing, nothing to do with the storyline of the particular game you're playing, but just help flesh out the world.
Yeah.
If those things don't exist, that's why video games, I think, are the current, this might be a bold statement, are the current best way to consume fantasy media. Because you have there's just so much more lore that you can embed in that without having to constantly produce more content and contradict yourself. It's all still in one place, and the people can find it.
100%, dude. All the Skyrim games, obviously, the Elder Scrolls, the larger franchise, Dragon Age. The worlds are so expansive and the lore is so deep. Dude, I 100% agree with you there.
Because as they're building the game, doing the mechanics of the game, there's also a team of people putting together the lore for the game. So that everything is cohesive. They try not to overlook anything, and anything is possible.
Yeah.
So they can kind of get creative with things.
Well, where Rowling messed up was she would just blurt out an answer at a conference. Mm-hmm. Why did blah, 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 blah? Because this, A, B, and C. It's like...
Or you just don't think things through. Like, you're in a 1,000-year-old castle.
Oh, yeah.
How is a secret chamber that's been there since the beginning of the castle gonna be under a toilet or a sink when those things didn't exist in England 1,000 years ago? And to be honest, never crossed my mind until it became a meme on the internet, and because she gave a response to it. Like, didn't cross my mind. I didn't really care. I didn't really think it through. But they're trying to make a Harry Potter a deeper lore than it really is.
What was the one she said about wizards taking shits, like, before toilet paper or something?
Yeah, so something to the effect of, like, people asked her, well, what did wizards do? Because she said, well, the toilet wasn't there when they originally built it. Someone built the bathroom around the entrance and didn't know it, which opens a whole host of questions about how that got involved in the secret entrance. Anyway, so then someone asked, well, what did they do before the bathrooms were there? And she said, oh, well, they would just shit on the floor and make it disappear with magic. Like, there's that meme on the internet going around, I don't know if you've seen it, but like Harry Potter and the Barrett 50 caliber, where he just turns Voldemort's head into a pink mist, where like, Harry grew up with muggles, he knows what a gun is. Like, there is no magical defense that has been addressed that protects him against firearms.
Bring in a freaking AR.
Like, why do we need to wave this magic stick around with an insta-kill spell when there's no way he's going to be stopping a pound of lead flying towards him at 2,000 feet per second?
Bring in a grenade launcher, dude. Good, something.
I don't know.
That's actually really funny.
Like, it's just kind of ridiculous how the wizards are so set on magical supremacy when, like, most of the problems that they face... Like, why are you riding a steam train to Hogwarts when you could get there in half the time in a plane?
You're telling me that wasn't some C.S. Lewis influence there?
There's probably some Lewis there, and she does kind of mention in the books in passing that, like, modern technology stops working when it gets near a bunch of magic. So that might explain it. But, like, at the end of the day, like, you'd think that since Arthur Weasley could build a freaking flying car
Oh,
that,
yeah.
like, you know, maybe that tech could have taken off a little bit more.
You see, you bring up actually a really good point, which is when, after Tolkien, when these big other fantasy franchises came up, everyone unfairly expected the authors to have all the answers and all this lore like Tolkien did. Where J.K. messes up, though, is she, and to this day, tries to make sense of all her worlds. Like, just stop.
It doesn't all have to have an answer.
Why can't she just say that? That's
Just-
my problem.
If, like, my opinion on it is, as a reader, read the story and enjoy what is written and what you are told. If there is a reference to something that is outside of the story, that needs to be a fleshed out idea that you can answer as an author. However, as a consumer, don't expect everyone to have a Tolkien type lore. Tolkien sprinkled his lore throughout the work, so it's a completely reasonable question to ask, who is Beren and Luthien? Who is this Erindil? Harry Potter, just accept it. Just take it. Like, she wanted the Chamber of Secrets to be in a bathroom. Like, she
Just admit it.
didn't think about toilets being invented. Like, you don't have to be an expert in everything to write a story.
I wish she would have just said that. She could have avoided a lot of, pushback and a lot of criticism. She would have just. That's my point. Is like her pride. I think kind of got in the way a little bit.
Mm-hmm. And she thought she was God.
Yeah, it's like, lady. Yes, you have the most successful fantasy franchise ever.
You don't have to be inerrant as an author.
Yeah.
You can just say, you know what? I didn't think that through.
Yeah.
What do you think a good explanation is?
She should have turned it around on. Yeah.
Because honestly, in my opinion, one of the things Star Wars got right was the fact that, like, for the movies, yes, George Lucas is God and explain, like, the movies, he did it all. But they also opened up the IP to let other people write about it. And
True.
granted, there are moments where there are books that have been written that are in confliction with one another, multiple things happening in the same time period. But at the end of the day, most of that can be kind of sorted out. But at the end of the day, no one person can write an entire universe in a short amount of time with all of the details answered. Let fan fiction take over.
That's
if you
right.
find some fan fiction that sounds pretty cool, say, hey, I like that idea. Let's adopt it into the canon.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, be open to.
Crowdsource a little bit. Somebody else
Seriously.
might have a better idea than you.
They probably do.
There's a lot of people out there with a lot of good talents at writing.
Yeah. That's where Lucasfilm, the best decision that George Lucas ever made was when he created Lucasfilm. He created a branch division for comics, novels, because he knew he couldn't do it all. He
Yeah.
knew other people would have to come in and expand the world and get new fans. Like Timothy Zahn, who wrote the
Thrawn trilogy.
Thrawn trilogy in the 90s. Dude, you want to talk about the most underrated Star Wars contributor, it's him.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he brought in a lot of new Star Wars fans,
Yeah.
I mean, we don't talk about that guy enough.
Well, technically he's not canon anymore, so it doesn't...
Is he not?
No.
You mean the story of that trilogy?
His trilogy is not canon anymore because of the Disney takeover.
Do you consider Star Wars fantasy? Or is it a blend? I've actually had a lot of thoughts on this.
I mean, it has sci-fi elements, but I would put it... I'd put it in the category of science fiction fantasy. The Force is magic.
Yeah.
They just call it the Force. Like, they don't try to explain how hyperspace works, at least not in the movies. There have been writings about how it actually works, but, like, they don't try to explain how hyperspace works. Just deal with it.
Yeah, exactly.
We can travel faster than light speed. Shut up. Enjoy it.